Glad to be here.
Are you okay?
Very well.
Okay, let's talk about the trade connectivity. The OECD has been working on improving the trade connectivity in Kazakhstan and Central Asia. So can you share about the details?
Sure. I mean, we have been working on trade and transport connectivity challenges for a number of years. Our first big report was launched here at the Forum in 2019. With the support of Kazakhstan, we're now working on a second phase of that work, which is mostly focused on the trade side, because the previous work was concentrated on transport infrastructure and transport policies. We're also working on a particular project on the middle corridor. And there are specific themes that come out of both of those, and they're perhaps the most important messages we have. The first is that one must never focus on the transport and the infrastructure to the exclusion of issues like trade policy and trade facilitation, because the aim is to become integrated, not just connected. The aim is for Kazakhstan not to be a transit country through which other people are shipping goods on very fast trains. The aim is to become a country where that transport connectivity generates new activity, new trade in Kazakhstan and in the region. And linked to that, therefore, is the need to address a lot of concerns of the private sector about conditions for doing business, and also to make sure that improvements in physical connections and transport are accompanied by better trade facilitation, simpler border procedures, standardization and harmonization of standards. There's a tremendous amount that can be done to help make Central Asia as a whole a more integrated economy.
So any crisis is also an opportunity. So due to our geopolitical condition in the world, could Kazakhstan use all these opportunities?
Well, I think Kazakhstan is already doing so. It's adopted a very, very measured political position since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. But it has, first of all, responded to the economic shock expeditiously. Everyone here knows the economic impact of the war was less than expected at the time, although there are a lot of economic headwinds to be addressed going forward. Obviously, there was a benefit from the oil price spike, which helped, but we see with deepening engagement with its neighbors, with the attention focused on the middle corridor, Kazakhstan beginning to see longer-term things that might have needed to happen anyway, but they will happen faster. And the middle corridor is a good example. As its potential, in my view, is somewhat limited. Too many borders, too many modal shifts, from rail to sea, back to rail, back to sea. But as a trade and integration route, it has tremendous potential. In other words, its potential is not simply to ship goods from China to Europe and Europe to China, but to generate trade and activity in all of the countries that abut the Trans-Caspian international transport route.
Yeah. So then, in general, how do you describe the current economic and social development in Kazakhstan?
Well, as I've indicated, it has weathered not only the war, it's weathered the last two big shocks rather well. The country has been subjected to a number of major shocks in the last decade and more. The global financial crisis, the commodity price collapse in the middle of the 2010s, the pandemic, the war. It has shown admirable resilience, but there is a worrying trend here. After each of these shocks, when growth has recovered, the trend rate of growth has been a bit lower than before the shock. There's a kind of longer-term slowing trend. And in particular, we see that not just in economic growth, but in productivity. And that's absolutely critical, because the issue is not just the overall GDP number for Kazakhstan. It's creating more and more productive jobs for people to live lives that they want to live, to realize their talents and ambitions. And I think there, the diversification agenda is absolutely central. Not because Kazakhstan could not grow GDP and export successfully with a less diversified growth model, but that reliance on the primary sector doesn't generate all that many jobs. And it needs to develop new sectors generating high productivity employment for its people.
Right. So we should diversify our economy, not just being dependent on oil and gas, right? Our natural resources.
Absolutely. Those resources will remain vital, as they should, and in some ways they can evolve. I think there's tremendous potential in the mining sector We know the age of hydrocarbons is coming to an end. But the net zero transition, the carbon-free transition, is going to require a lot more lithium and other rare earths and critical minerals with which Kazakhstan is endowed. And so I think there's tremendous potential for Kazakhstan to profit from that transition in one sector, even though another sector that's been very important will be on its way out. But at the same time, more competitive tradable activities that generate high value-added jobs will be critical, because mineral mining, like hydrocarbon production, is capital intensive. It doesn't generate that many jobs.
True. So then, looking ahead, what are the future priorities for OECD in Kazakhstan, maybe plans?
We've actually been touching on many of them. At the end of last year, the head of state visited the OECD, and the Secretary General and President Tokayev signed a memorandum of understanding, which also had an action plan to take us forward over the next few years. And those priorities include issues around the reform of the state-owned enterprise sector, which is critical to creating conditions for diversification. Because those parastatals create competitive and other distortions that get in the way. We continue to work on trade and transport connectivity. We continue to work together on public governance and anti-corruption, which is absolutely critical, particularly for small firms. The burdens of inadequate public services or of corruption, weakness of the rule of law, these are things that big oil companies, big mining companies can deal with. They have the resources, they have the political muscle. They're death to emerging small and medium enterprises. So our action plan is in many ways structured around the very priorities we discussed around productivity and diversification.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
So lately we will have more interesting interviews coming up shortly. And now you can watch on the topic about the creative economy, promoting sustained and inclusive growth, moderated by Salvador Leal. Stay tuned.
Астана Халықаралық форумы 8-9 маусым күндері елордада. Сыртқы саясат және халықаралық қауіпсіздік, тұрақты даму, энергетика және климаттың өзгеруі, экономика мен қаржы тақырыптары бойынша ауқымды бас қосу өтеді. Форумның тікелей көрсетілімін Silkway телеарнасынан көріңіздер.